In 1995, Ze'ev Sternhell, then the Leon Blum Chair of Political Science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, published The Founding Myths of Israel: Nationalism, Socialism, and the Making of the Jewish State. I have used the term nationalist socialism, despite the fact that it does not figure in an American dictionary, where the more usual term national socialism is preferred. But National Socialism, which was commonly used at the beginning of the 20th century, has been contaminated by its association with the Nazis. An enlightening history of the development of Zionism as a form of nationalist socialism can be found in David Ben-Gurion's evolving language. Indeed, Zionism was just one of a number of examples of nationalist socialism, where, strictly speaking, the equality and welfare of society is cast aside in favor of furthering national aims. It is in this atmosphere where Ben-Gurion can declare that class interests are identical with national interests, and where he could advance his ambition that the Yishuv be transformed from a working class into a working nation. Ben-Gurion summarized his nationalist socialist principles as follows. Our movement has always had the socialistic idea that the party of the working class, unlike the parties of other classes, is not only a class party solely concerned with matters affecting the class, but a national party responsible for the future of the entire people. He later condemned the class concept that obscures the national character of our movement.
Die Brandstiftung des Reichstagsgebäudes als missglückter Versuch einer groß angelegten Aktion ist nur ein Zeichen dessen, was Europa vom Siege dieser teuflischen Lehre der Zerstörung zu erwarten hätte. Es wird die oberste Aufgabe der nationalen Regierung sein, diese Erscheinung nicht nur im Interesse Deutschlands, sondern auch des übrigen Europas in unserem Lande restlos auszurotten und zu beseitigen. Sie wird nicht die Erkenntnis aus dem Auge verlieren, dass es sich dabei nicht nur um das negative Problem der Bekämpfung dieser Lehre und ihrer Organisationen handelt, sondern um die Durchführung der positiven Aufgabe der Gewinnung des deutschen Arbeiters für den nationalen Staat. Nur die Herstellung einer wirklichen Volksgemeinschaft, die sich über die Interessen und Gegensätze der Stände und Klassen erhebt, vermag allein auf die Dauer dieser Verirrung des menschlichen Geistes den Nährboden zu entziehen.
It is significant that Ben-Gurion hardly ever used the word proletariat. The proletariat, according to the Marxist view, accepted by all socialist parties, was universalistic. It was not representative of national interests at all. As Sternhell shows, Ben-Gurion very much harnessed private property and capital to further nationalist aims, per the interpretation of nationhood prevalent in European nationalism and the dominant strand of labor Zionism. Where Ben-Gurion was concerned, the only criterion that mattered was and remained a functional and utilitarian criterion. Private capital fulfills a Zionist mission if it creates Jewish employment, and public capital falls short of Zionism if it does not serve this purpose. The public capital invested in the building of Zichron and Binyamina, two settlements where Arab labor dominated, failed Zionism. The private capital that built Magdiel and Ra'anana, two settlements that employed Jewish workers exclusively, fulfilled a Zionist mission 100%. This was elaborated on more directly in 1931. We have no special interests in a socialist regime or a commune in this country if those involved are not Jewish workers. Employment of Arab labor in the Jewish settlements, Ben-Gurion declared, carried with it the danger of a hostile alien element in our midst. The outbreak of the Second World War on September 1, 1939, saw Poland's skies swarmed with planes and opened the floodgates of Hitler's blitzkrieg. At the same time, Germany's advance eastward would yield the Reich with new territory to depopulate and repopulate with German settlers, utilizing the new living space, or Lebensraum. Despite the enormous resources involved in the Nazi war planning, the settlement of its new eastern possessions was an immediate consideration. Upon his return from Poland's besieged and bombed-out capital, Hitler boasted in a speech to the Reichstag,
Ich habe einfach aus Mitleid mit Frauen und Kindern den Machthabern in Warschau angeboten, wenigstens die Zivilbevölkerung ausziehen zu lassen. Ich habe die Fristen für alle Fälle verlängern lassen Bomber und schwere Artillerie angewiesen, nur einwandfrei militärische Objekte anzugreifen. Ich habe daraufhin angeboten, einen ganzen Stadtteil, Praga, überhaupt nicht zu beschießen, sondern für die zivile Bevölkerung zu reservieren, um diese die Möglichkeit zu geben, sich dorthin zurückzuziehen.
Of course, Warsaw was subjected to a month-long bombardment and siege, which killed some 25,000 people. The Luftwaffe bombed civilian and military targets the same, contrary to Hitler's claims of distinction. Hitler also dismissed Poland's nationhood, celebrating
Dieses geschichtlich einmaligen Zusammenbruchs eines sogenannten Staatswesens. Und als wichtigste Aufgabe aber eine Neuordnung der demografischen Verhältnisse. Das heißt, eine Umsiedlung der Nationalitäten so, dass sie am Abschluss der Entwicklung bessere Trennungslinien begeben, als es heute der Fall ist. In diesem Sinn weder das deutsche Volk noch ich sind auf den Vertrag von Versailles vereidigt worden, sondern ich bin nur vereidigt auf das Wohl meines Volkes, dessen beauftragt ich bin, und auf das Wohl jener, die das Schicksal in unserem Lebensraum gestellt hat und damit unlösbar mit unserem eigenen Wohle verband.
To implement this, Hitler commissioned the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler to lead a Reichskommissariat for the strengthening of Germandom. The commission had three objectives. Number one, bring back those German citizens and racial Germans abroad who are eligible for permanent return to the Reich. Number two, eliminate the harmful influence of such alien parts of the population as constitute a danger to the Reich and the German community. And number three, create new German colonies by resettlement of German citizens and racial Germans coming back from abroad. Robert Louis Cole, an American Army intelligence surveyor in German-occupied Europe during World War II, provided valuable insight into the German settlement policy. Hitler made it quite clear that he thought in terms of settling Germans on the new soil and expelling the natives. This soil must be tilled by Germans, said Hitler. The great mistake of our former times was to imagine that Germans could take land with the alien peoples upon it, have them till it, and Germanize them. The resultant intermarriage only put German blood at the disposal of other nationalities, such as the Poles, who would ultimately take the land back if they continued to till it. The scattered Germans of the world must be consolidated on this newly won soil as the sole owners. The new society would consist of pastoral German communities. The farmer would serve as the vanguard of the Nazi conquest of the East. Idealization of rural life and of the unspoiled German peasant in the East was combined with a utopian fantasy of a new communal socialism to be built up in Eastern Europe under German leadership. However, as was typical of other nationalist socialist societies, the idealization of pastoral living veiled the reality, where the state harnessed the wealth of powerful, private interests to further the wealth and power of the nation. The reconstruction of the German economy and the rearmament of the Third Reich was carried out in alliance with organized German business interests, Germany's professional soldier class, and the bureaucracy. In spite of all their petty bourgeois slogans, the Nazi leaders had gradually come to realize that only compromise and temporary coalition would enable them to seize and hold power. They had grasped by 1933 that reconstruction and rearmament were the goals of powerful groups outside the movement, which could be harnessed to it through the more opportunistic members of these groups. In this way, the outermost layer of the movement, the statists like Papin, Schacht, and Blumberg, as well as countless smaller figures in the party, served to bind to National Socialism the machinery and the skills of tried and experienced segments of the German ruling class. Ihor Kamenetsky as well exposed the ideological underpinnings of German settlement in his revealing work, Secret Nazi Plans for Eastern Europe, a study of Lebensraum policies. Nazi authorities wanted to see hundreds of thousands of volunteers from the Old Reich, either from peasant stock or from those willing to embrace wholeheartedly the ideology of blood and soil, become pioneer peasants in this newly conquered Lebensraum. In building the new Nazi society, racial criteria were chosen instead of the criterion of social origin. The common unit considered for this purpose was, in the Nazi case, the nation as a whole rather than a class. From his position not only as Reichsführer SS, but now settlement czar, Himmler described the aim of so-called Germanization. It is not our task to Germanize the East in the old sense, that is, to teach the people there the German language and the German law, but to see to it that only people of purely Germanic blood live in the East. Polish city names were changed, and some 1.5 million Poles were expelled from their homes. Warsaw was to be depopulated from a city of 1.3 million to just 80,000 and settled with 130,000 German colonists. Every building was to be destroyed. By the end of the war, they had largely carried this out. As described by Alexandra Ritchie, the ideological justification for the erasure of Warsaw was simple. Warsaw had at one time been German, but had been corrupted by the Poles and the Jews. In a 1942 edition of Das Vorfeld, a periodical for Germans living in occupied Poland, the Nazi historian Dr. Hans Hof wrote, "In 1420, 85% of the names of burghers in Warsaw were German, and they were the only ones who brought any cultural and economic life, administration, and justice to the city." During the period of military control of Poland, wrote Richard Lucas, 531 towns and villages were burned. History contains many eerie coincidences. As Ilan Pappé had famously revealed in his work, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, when it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on March 10, 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of an ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. In 2018, an 82-year-old Ze'ev Sternhell wrote an opinion piece for Haaretz with the title, "In Israel, Growing Fascism and a Racism Akin to Early Nazism." The left is no longer capable of overcoming the toxic ultra-nationalism that has evolved here, the kind whose European strain almost wiped out a majority of the Jewish people. Like every ideology, the Nazi race theory developed over the years. At first, it only deprives Jews of their civil and human rights. It's possible that without World War II, the Jewish problem would have ended only with the voluntary expulsion of Jews from Reich lands. After all, most of Austria and Germany's Jews made it out in time. It's possible that this is the future facing Palestinians. Ominous words, years before the current situation. Just last month, historian Benny Morris wrote in the same paper that Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza, but it may be on the way there. In terms of hearts and minds, a portion of the nation is already there, even if it does not realize this. The Israelis that like to cite Amalek in reference to the Palestinians. A biblical enemy of the Israelites, the Torah decreed that any memory of the Amalek must be exterminated. These are the same Israelis that speak aloud, or in whispers, about uprooting the Palestinians from their land, about exile and transfers. It may be worth recalling here that the Nazis, in the beginning of World War II in 1939 to 1940, talked about exiling the Jews of Europe to Madagascar or somewhere else, before they started in on the mass extermination. The dehumanization that has to take root before mass murder is already here. Once upon a time, a minister in Israel talked about cockroaches in a bottle and was reprimanded. Today, there are hardly any reprimands. The dehumanization is evident every day, apparent from the soldiers' testimonies, from the killing of civilians in Gaza, from the brutality shown by soldiers and jailers while detainees, some from Hamas and some civilians, are led half-naked to the detention camps, from the routine of beatings and torture in the detention camps and prisons themselves. The Jewish Israeli public is indifferent to all of it. These are all signs of the dehumanization that precedes and promotes genocide. The trigger will come, and then the genocide will follow. Maybe there will be a combination of ethnic cleansing and mass murder, as the Turks did to the Christian communities in Asia Minor between 1894 and 1924. Contrary to Benny Morris's contention that no genocide has occurred thus far in Gaza, two historians from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Amos Goldberg and Daniel Blattman, state a comprehensive case in an article titled, "There's no Auschwitz in Gaza, but it's still genocide." A meticulous comparative examination of events over the past year leads to the painful conclusion that Israel is indeed committing genocide in Gaza. Can intent be proven in the case of Gaza? Aside from the idea of using atomic weapons, Israeli politicians, among them Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Isaac Herzog, and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and senior military officials have made numerous statements indicating genocidal intent, all of which have been documented. There are no innocents in Gaza. We will carry out a second Nakba. We must destroy Amalek, and more. Most instances of genocide in modern times have occurred after prolonged violent conflicts between the group of perpetrators and the group of victims. For example, prior to the Ottomans' genocide of Armenians, which began in 1915, Armenians revolted against Ottoman tyranny and the suppression of their national aspirations, engaging in acts of terror against the state as early as the late 19th century. In this context, it is essential to note that most acts of genocide are perceived by their perpetrators as acts of self-defense against their victims. Genocide does not have to conform to the Nazi paradigm, which viewed every Jew as an enemy to be exterminated. Genocide is also never linear, and contradictory processes always exist within it. For instance, while Armenians were deported and massacred in vast areas of the Ottoman Empire, in major cities like Izmir and Istanbul, they were hardly affected. In certain cases, Heinrich Himmler, architect of the final solution, temporarily halted the extermination of Jews at specific places or times due to economic or diplomatic considerations. Similarly, Israel has allowed humanitarian aid into Gaza while simultaneously killing innocent civilians there. Almost always, the orders to carry out mass murders are vague, elusive, and open to interpretation. This was also the case with the Germans' final solution. No extermination order was issued from the top of the pyramid, Adolf Hitler, to the bottom. Instead, complex interactions that included green lights to escalate violent measures, hints of approval for murderous acts, and grassroots initiatives combined to add up to a rolling escalation. Only at a later stage did the process crystallize into a clear resolution whose impact became visible on the ground. Here, the analogy to what is happening in Gaza is also relevant. In Myanmar, starting in 2016, some 850,000 Rohingya were expelled to Bangladesh and about 9,000 were murdered. This means that there was no physical extermination of all Rohingya, but rather of only a small percentage of the group. Currently, a lawsuit against Myanmar is being heard by the International Court of Justice. It was submitted by the Gambia, which was joined by several other countries, including Germany and the United Kingdom. The statements by Myanmar officials about Myanmar intent to exterminate the Rohingya are weak and incidental compared to the flood of genocidal statements heard from all corridors of politics, society, media, and the military in Israel, expressing extreme dehumanization of Palestinians and a desire for their widespread extermination. Genocide is any action that leads to the destruction of a collective's ability to exist. The murder of children, starvation, destruction of infrastructure, including that of the healthcare system, destruction of most homes, including the erasure of entire neighborhoods and towns, such as Jabalia and Rafah, ethnic cleansing in the northern strip, destruction of all of Gaza's universities and most cultural institutions and mosques, destruction of government and organizational infrastructure, mass graves, destruction of infrastructure for local food production and water distribution. Gaza as a human, national, collective entity no longer exists. This is precisely what genocide looks like. What is happening in Gaza is not the Holocaust. There is no Auschwitz and no Treblinka there. However, it is a crime from the same family, a crime of genocide.